Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. I'm Phil Ponce. On the show tonight, a community-run shelter for migrants has closed its doors. We'll talk to two of the volunteers about how they were able to give hundreds of new arrivals a first home in Chicago. A new scholarship foundation is looking to help Latinos fund their educations. A local DACA recipient gives a child's perspective on the migrant experience in her book, Homecoming.
If they don't know about it, how do they know that they'd love it? I didn't know.
A local biochemistry professor wants to get more Latinos into laboratories. And a rare show of dreamlike paintings by a surrealist artist at the Art Institute of Chicago. All that coming up, but first our top story tonight, local volunteers and the city's incoming migrants. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors.
Since last September, government officials have scrambled to support the thousands of migrants who've come to Chicago. A year later, resources remain strained and few long-term systems are in place. But in spring of this year, a community-led effort to house and assist migrants rose in a Pilsen warehouse. Since May, organizers with the volunteer collective Todo para Todos say they've hosted 260 residents and have found permanent housing for more than 150 of them. The shelter ended its operations this past weekend. And joining us now with more are two volunteers from that effort, Cynthia Nambo and Lindsay Gifford. Welcome both to Chicago Tonight. First of all, Lindsay Gifford, why did the shelter close? It seems like you were being successful.
We were, but there are a number of reasons why we felt we had to close. First of all, the insurance on the building, which was held by the donor of the warehouse, has lapsed now, so we felt that it would be no longer safe to host people in the shelter. Second of all, many of our amazing volunteers were educators or educational administrators, and so with the return back to school, we lost a lot of volunteer capacity, including myself as a professor. And third, we fought really hard to be acknowledged as an affiliated shelter with the city of Chicago, but unfortunately we weren't able to be included within that infrastructure.
And Cynthia Nambo, not being an affiliated resource, what did that mean in terms of how much assistance you could give the people who were residents at your facility?
Well, it's interesting, and it's really a scarcity because we don't have a stream of funds. And because we don't have the stream of funds, then we cannot maintain safety, maybe a safety team. We can't maintain or be able to support people for their own housing. So the city shelters provide 6 months of rental assistance. We have a welcoming center, well, 2 of them, that are helping us, and that's maybe $800 one-time emergency funding.
That's interesting, Lindsay, because one thinks of a volunteer effort as having one would assume comparable resources to city-affiliated centers, but that's not the case because you are dealing with volunteers and it's community input, community help, and so forth. Give me an idea of what a typical day was like at what was a warehouse, but then became a home to these hundreds of people.
Sure. Over the summer, I would go in multiple times a week, actually with my 2 grade school children, and we enjoyed sharing time with them. We would make sure that people were fed. We had 3 meals a day. I usually did the lunch shift. We made sure everyone had a functioning air mattress that wasn't punctured or leaking, especially for pregnant women, so to make sure that they weren't sleeping on the floor. And we helped with everyday needs, making sure people had hygiene products. I would stock the bathrooms with toilet paper and soap. And then also help with translation service for the Spanish-speaking volunteers who were on site that might be accessing jobs that were available in the neighborhood, looking at apartment postings, so anything that the residents needed assistance with, we would help out.
Cynthia, we just heard that one of the priorities was keeping people safe, and I understand that your biggest expense was security. Why was that your biggest expense?
Well, one, because most people were all volunteers, and at first we actually had Victory Outreach volunteering. However, I felt because we had to, scarcity of funds, we had to prioritize the night shift. And to do the night shift, that is, you know, there's a strain on your body, on your emotions. And so we felt like, okay, we take some of the donations and give some incentive for people to be able to be all night and keeping people safe. And that's the only shift we were able to really fund until the end.
Because there were some issues with theft, with fighting. The residents, I understand, voted to kick some people out, but you couldn't do it. Why couldn't you?
Why couldn't I kick someone out?
Yeah, why?
Oh, well, some people did leave. So, and because of the fact that they were engaged with violent acts, there were not many. However, actually, the one that I know of was one or two, and then there was one fight. And so we really, you know, needed to make sure that we were keeping it safe. And according to our safety team who work in the other shelters, in comparison, they said it was better because we built the community. So while there were issues, and it was something that we could not sustain over time because we didn't have the flow of funds.
And Lindsay, a little bit more on what help did you get from, say, the Alderman's office or other governmental officials? Anything?
So the Alderman's office, I wasn't involved in those conversations personally, but we had access to some of his staff members almost on a daily basis. So they were assisting us with donations, whether they were material or cash. Cynthia might know better. Getting us connected to the warehouse in the first place and the donor of the building. I believe he was a part of that negotiation and making sure that we did have some support throughout the summer months.
And Cynthia Namba, when people would ask you why you were doing this, what would you say?
Well, I think it's the same for me and Lindsay. We are from immigrant parents where our families have documented or undocumented status. And for us, this is our legacy. This is our future. The United States has been built and evolved around immigrant longevity and sustainability, and so we wanted to make sure that not only don't we want our current migrants to sleep on the floor, but we want them to have self-determination and self-actualization.
And Lindsay, as you look at the big picture, Lindsay Gifford, as you look at the big picture, from your understanding, how many migrants continue to live on the floor at police stations or at the airport? What are you hearing?
I believe the numbers are in the thousands right now at the police stations. We've still got buses coming in daily pretty much. Do you know what the figures are currently?
District 12 is 200, and so that's pretty much the average. And as soon as they decompress a station, then we get another bus or three.
And what are the latest statistics in terms of how many people have come in the past year?
I believe it's about 13,500 newcomers in the city overall, and they're still coming, so that number is rising.
And most of them are coming from what states?
From Venezuela.
I know, but...
Texas and Florida.
Texas and Florida. I see.
Texas mostly.
An interesting pipeline. So the Johnson administration, how would you assess how the relatively new mayor's administration is doing in terms of handling this influx of people that the city is seeing?
They're a new administration, so they've had to act quickly, but I appreciate the effort to open shelters throughout the city, right, not targeting any particular neighborhood. The more that we can work together, I think the more effective the policy will be. I do hope that the Johnson administration looks at international expertise from organizations like the UNHCR, because we have long-standing, decades-long...
UNHCR stands for?
The UN High Commission on Refugees. So we have long-standing expertise on how to work with refugee and asylum-seeking populations. And so it's not that we have to reinvent the wheel, but we do have to learn best practices quickly.
Cynthia, as you know, most people might see images of migrant families coming in, and they think of them as a group, as statistics. What would you like people to know about some of the individuals who you met?
Oh, goodness. How many are there? So one of the things I think that people don't understand is we have lawyers, we have doctors, we have people who take care of children, we have maintenance people, and they're all of equal value. And because of the fact that they are looked at in this homogenous way and a negative way, and one in terms of charity or pity, that is actually creating something that we don't want to in the long run. So we really need to see them and really think about them in terms of dignity. And so one person, I was moving in the car because we're taking her to temporary shelter, temporary housing before we're waiting for her permanent housing. And she told me that, she crossed the jungle and she was thinking the children on the journey had to learn how to survive in the jungle. So they're using the washroom in the jungle. It's a very different way of surviving. And then at the shelter, you needed to unlearn those things.
Interesting. And we didn't have time to get into this, but you've moved 150 people into permanent housing. I wish we could explore how you've done that. In the meantime, Cynthia Nambo and Lindsay Gifford, thank you both for being here.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you for having us.
University of Chicago biochemistry professor Juan Mendoza says he hit a few bumps on his path to a career in science and academia, but he says mentorship became the catalyst for his success. Now he's looking for ways to bring more Latinos into the lab. Producer Erica Gunderson has that story.
The work that we do in the lab, I'm very interested in how things interact at the molecular level.
In his lab at the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering, professor, protein engineer, and computational biologist Juan Mendoza researches the immune system to engineer cancer treatments. It's work he came to a little later in life, and it's in a field he says his immigrant parents couldn't have imagined for their son as they raised him in California.
I never knew science could be a career because my parents were from a small farming town, don't speak English. It was just not a pathway that we even thought was possible.
Mendoza started out studying biochemistry at San Francisco State University, but pivoted to a career in IT before finishing his degree. After the post-9/11 recession, Mendoza returned to pursuing a career in science, where he says support via mentorship and salaried fellowships allowed him to reach his potential.
I remember working as a kid up through college, so the focus on my academics wasn't always there, so I wasn't the strongest student. And after coming back to finish my bachelor's degree, I got introduced to these fellowship programs that allowed me to do research, and it paid me a salary so I could focus on my research and studies, and that made the world of difference. All of a sudden, I was applying to graduate schools, went to one of the top graduate programs in Dallas, Texas.
Mendoza joined the faculty at the University of Chicago in 2018. This year, Mendoza was named a Freeman Hrabowski Scholar by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which funds efforts to bring more scientists from diverse backgrounds into scientific institutions. Mendoza says he got right to work on recruiting.
I actually put out an advertisement on Facebook at these local neighborhood groups and said, hey, I'm open to hiring people from the community that would be interested in STEM.
Little Village native and University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign graduate Isabella Castillo has been working in his lab for the last year.
I've been able to work one-on-one with Dr. Juan Mendoza and various graduate students on their research projects related to protein function and protein engineering. My plan is to pursue a career in medicine, and initially my first job out of college was in a clinical healthcare setting, and after being offered the position here as the research technician, I thought I was going to have to choose between the two, but my boss, Dr. Juan Mendoza, was really understanding and supportive of my plan to gain both clinical and research experience during my gap years. I'd never before experienced having someone who comes from the same background as I do, guide me professionally. And I think he really has taught me, the sky is the limit.
Mendoza says every institution should look for ways to connect with aspiring scientists like Castillo.
We have to always be out there and just let them know that it's a possibility. Or, if they don't know about it, how do they know that they'd love it? I didn't know. And ever since getting my first chances in working in a lab, I've just been in love with the work I do.
For Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, this is Erica Gunderson.
And Mendoza will be among the faculty and students on hand at the University of Chicago's Southside Science Festival on Saturday, September 30th. The free event offers science activities for all ages, and you can find more details on our website. Back with more right after this.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
In the politics surrounding migration to the United States, the decision to make that journey in the first place is often called into question. But children of migrants typically have no say in that decision. And our next guest says those perspectives matter too. In her book, Homecoming, El Viaje a Mi Hogar, Chicagoan Margarita Quinones Pena describes the migrant journey to Chicago through her own eyes as a child coming to her new home. And author Margarita Quinones Pena joins us now. And thank you for being here. First of all, very quickly, describe the story that the book tells.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was my story, my personal story of crossing the border from Durango, Mexico, crossing through the U.S.-Mexico border to get to Chicago, Illinois on Halloween night.
And Halloween night, it's interesting because on Halloween night, you were dressed as princesses.
Right.
Why did your mother, with whom you were crossing the border, dress you as princesses?
Well, you know, elephant in the room, I'm very fair-skinned to begin with, and my sister as well. And on Halloween night, we were advised, you know, we had never celebrated Halloween in Mexico. We celebrate Day of the Dead, and that night, she was told, if we get pulled over by Border Patrol, you're their nanny, and you're taking them to a Halloween party on behalf of their parents. And effectively so, it happened. We were pulled over. We had our Halloween costumes. No one said a word. We got right by, and that was our biggest hurdle.
That's a very interesting family dynamic. The fact that in terms of appearance, both you and your sister, very fair complected. You have blue eyes, blonde hair all your life, and your mother pretended she was your nanny when you were pulled over.
That's right. My mother is not as fair-skinned, and you know, I think that it just goes to show and just speaks on the spectrum, right, of undocumented, of immigrants. We don't not only all look the same, we don't all do the same things, and there's just so much range and depth to all of us.
So why did you write the book?
A couple parts to that. So first, I wrote the book because I was looking for a Mother's Day gift to my mother. I wanted her to have a book, just read herself her story of crossing the border. There was not a lot out there, and the ones that were not written by us. They were written about us, but never by us. And I had the idea of just asking her about our story. And when she told me the reality of crossing the border, her version was so entirely different as to what I remember. I remembered this magical journey, getting dressed up as a princess for the first time to arrive in Chicago, landing here, my first time in an airplane, seeing my father for the first time in what had been maybe a year or two at that point. So all of it, to me, was magical. And to her, she was on her third trimester. She was crossing the border with 3 children, being led by one 8-year-old, and just, you know, with her heart in her hand and hoping for the best. She describes us running through the desert for 5 hours, landing in a backyard somewhere, and just, again, hoping for the mercy of our community. And that's kind of how, over time and through the days, we ended up in my father's hands again.
So the book tells the story of how you got here, and you say it's aimed particularly at children. Why is it so important for children to know your story? Well,
you know, there are so many narratives out there, you know, and it's so easily politicized. And I think that, these stories need to be told for children to see themselves in these books in a positive light. But also, that's not the end of it. That's not the deal breaker. Not having citizenship does not mean full stop. You can continue to move on. You can continue to push forward. The drive doesn't stop. And you know, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
And we've been looking at illustrations of the book, beginning with your journey in Mexico and then your arrival in Little Village. Here you are with your mother, and I take it that's you holding your dad's hand.
That's right. Yes.
the middle child. The illustrator, she too is undocumented. What can you tell us about her?
So Ludvila lives in. She's from Mexico City. She lives in Puebla now, and she also has traveled to Chicago before and is no longer here. She's back in Mexico now. And, you know, this is an important message to both of us. When I was looking for an illustrator, it was important to me that it was a woman. It was important to me it was somebody that understood this message and this story, and she absolutely did and nailed it.
What message are you trying to get to the larger public? I know it's aimed specifically at children, but looking at it big picture-wise, what do you want people to take away from this?
I want people to understand the innocence of children following their family, following their home. Aside from the part of the choice, whether it's a good choice or a bad choice, you're following your heart, you're following your parents, and you don't know better. And I think it's just important to humanize these children, humanize these families,
Margarita Quinones Pena, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you again, Phil.
Again, the book is called Homecoming, El Viaje a Mi Hogar, the Journey to My Home. You can find more details on the book on our website. After photographer Jose Fuji Almanza tragically lost his 12-year-old son Joseph Jr. in 2017, Almanza sought to turn his pain into purpose. He and a team of supporters raised money through art sales and founded the Joseph Jr. Scholarship Foundation. In a September 24th event at the National Museum of Mexican Art, Almanza will present several college scholarships to help aspiring Latino artists pay for their education.
On the 24th of September, we are going to award scholarships. We are also doing a fundraiser. We're looking at Latino and Latina students because I think that's where we need the most help. I'm hoping that it helps fulfill their dreams. Originally, it started with art and photography, but we want to expand it to any college student that wants to apply. It started many years ago with my mom, where people that came from Mexico would come and stay with us. It was tough. Somehow or another, we managed to get enough food in the house so that she could feed us and other people. As I got older, I seen the value, and that's what I want to do, help other people in need. My son came along, and he kind of learned what I wanted to do, and he wanted to do the same thing. That's why this scholarship is in his honor. What he would say to me is, "Attaboy, Dad." Because I used to say that to him.
And there's still time to apply for the Joseph Jr. scholarships. Applications are open through September 18th, and you can find out more information on our website. Strange people occupy fantastic places in a new exhibition of art by a 20th century surrealist painter. The paintings were made by an artist well known in Mexico, but her work is rarely seen in this country. Producer Mark Vitale visited the Art Institute to explore the mysterious worlds created by Remedios Vara.
Many of the paintings express spiritual or personal transformation. They conjure images of dreams and magic.
There's absolutely an interest in occult practices, tarot, magic, but she moves her work into a very unique space that's entirely her own and is very intertextual and sort of has references to mechanical drawing and maybe to devotional art, but also to astronomy, alchemy, music.
Also, you see science and math and science fiction and literature. She was a very complex and very curious woman.
She is Remedios Vara, a Spanish-born painter who fled World War II and settled in Mexico City. The exhibition is called Science Fictions. It's a collaboration between the Art Institute of Chicago and the Museum of Modern Art in Mexico. We spoke with the co-curator from her home in Mexico City.
She is painting in the mid-1950s, something that looks completely out of her time. Her paintings are like a whole new universe, so it's very difficult to define her.
Vara flourished in Mexico at a time when expatriate men and women were welcomed by local artists.
It was a rather unique circumstance where women practitioners had as much voice and opportunity to show their work as their male counterparts. She's interested in alternative systems of belief, and she's interested in the efficacy of art, coming up with new ways that show how someone with a creative imagination would be able to affect social and political change.
She was concerned about the future of the planet and about the future of humanity, and thinking about female-led spirituality as a new possibility to change things.
There hasn't been a major museum exhibition of her work since 2000, so we're very excited to have this great concentration of her work here, also including her notebooks, many drawings that she made, books from her personal library, pages on which she wrote down spells and recipes.
Her work really surprises an audience that has never seen it before. You're gonna have to spend a long time in front of these paintings because they really trap you. They have this mystery in not only in the story but also in the way they were made that really catches your eye and your interest.
The works entice you to look very, very closely, and they reward close looking.
For Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, this is Mark Vitale.
Remedios Varo died suddenly in 1963 at the age of 55. The new exhibition is called Science Fictions. It will be on view until November 27th at the Art Institute. And that is our show tonight. For all of us here at Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, I'm Phil Ponce, and I thank you for watching.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to be a multilingual law firm that provides translators for a variety of languages.
Meet Rita Moreno,
I wanted to be a movie star from the time I saw my first picture.
who found her good times only after some really difficult ones.
I was often treated like a sex object.
Enjoy Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony winner Rita Moreno, just a girl who decided to go for it.
Very early on, I realized that getting attention was a very nice thing.
On American Masters.
Tonight at 8 on WTTW.